Okay, so how does all of this come together? Political context, economic context, French and Indian War, and you'll notice we have it written out a little bit more nicely. It's a little bit easier to read, perhaps. Who, England versus France and Native Americans. Where, Ohio River Valley, west of the colonies. Now, the whole length, right? Well, not the whole length, but a lot of it, Virginia to Maine. When, realize I forgot to tell you that, when 1754 to 1763. Now, why? If you could ask the question on why, the answer is probably going to be territorial disputes. Probably not going to be about British colonists encroaching on French-claimed territory, French-claimed land. But it is important for us to know that because it helps us know some more about this. All right? So here in our chart, I'm going to write it as action-reaction. Action-reaction. So England had to fight this war, and they were fighting wars in other places too, and they had to pay for them. And where are they going to get the money? Well, they're going to get the money from the colonies. Mercantilism. Right? Remember this colonies, under mercantilism, colonies are set up to make money for the home country, not for the colonies. All the money, all the taxes, everything was going back to the home country. And British colonists were encroaching on French claimed territory, so it was kind of, sort of, maybe a little bit, at least a little bit, the colonists' fault for this. So where are you going to get the money? You're going to get the money from the colonies. All right? That's how this fits, at least with the economic context here. And then we get into some more familiar things. So where did they get the money? From the colonies. How did they get the money? Through acts. So this is Great Britain. What do? They pass some acts. And acts equals taxes. Stamp Act, Sugar Act. Well, Sugar Act was first. Sugar Act, Stamp Act, and the Townshend Act. We're talking 1764 through 1767. So the French and Indian War ended 1763. The Crown, Britain, needed money to pay for it. So right after that, they started imposing some taxes. 1764, the Sugar Act, taxed sugar and molasses that were imported into the colonies. Colonists had to pay an extra tax on those things. Stamp Act, probably the most commonly known of these three anyway. 1765, taxed legal documents, newspapers, licenses, playing cards, anything made of paper. Made of paper, made from paper. Now, colonists had to buy a seal, they'd buy a stamp, and the stamp was put on these items to show that they had paid these taxes. People in England had had to pay them for a long time. Colonists were not used to doing that. This was the first direct tax on the colonists, and the other things were through businesses. Right? And it was repealed, the Stamp Act was repealed a year later, 1766, due to massive protests. Right? And the Townshend Act, 1767, taxed glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. Right? What was the reaction? Well, massive protests, we said. But some other things too. It was an angry reaction by the colonists. Caused lots of protests, massive protests. The Sons of Liberty were formed in Boston by Sam Adams, and this group was going to be influential in the build-up to the Revolutionary War. That's the Sons of Liberty. In 1764, after the Sugar Act was passed, Sam Adams helped form the Committees of Correspondence. The Committees of Correspondence. That helped spread the word around the colonies and establish communication for how to evade the taxes. Now, remember, it was a long time ago. No radio, no TV, no internet, no telephones. And you got a long way to go. If this is our map, think of our map here. You got Georgia down here, North Carolina, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Massachusetts. It's a lot of territory, a lot of ground to cover. How do you spread the word? Well, you got to do it by letter. You got to do it by courier. Somebody had to take a boat or ride a horse or something like that and spread the word around. How do you organize that? Through the committees of correspondence, right? And that was Sam Adams also. It was about 1764 that the phrase "no taxation without representation" started to be spread around. Remember that the colonies didn't have any representation in Parliament. They were largely self-governed, which also meant that they didn't have any representation over in, this way rather, on our map, over in England. Okay, so they didn't have any say-so in these acts and these taxes being imposed on them. And there was a boycott of British goods. It began in 1765, and a lot of smuggling started to get goods from other countries. And businesses started to just ignore the laws. Well, what happened? Action, reaction, action, reaction. What was the reaction by the British? Great Britain was the reaction? Passed the Declaratory Act. The Declaratory, they passed the Declaratory Act. So instead of easing up on things, the Crown doubled down. They imposed ever tighter restrictions, even tighter restrictions on the colonies. And the Declaratory Act said that, no, it was 1766. 1766. So even before the Townshend Act was even passed, this stuff happened. They declared the Declaratory Act, and then they declared the Townshend Act, right? So kind of a short period of time right here. Kind of a short period of time. The Declaratory Act said that Parliament could make the laws for the colonies in all cases. And remember, from our political context, colonies had been governing themselves independently, for the most part, or largely, for 100 years in some cases. And now, wait a minute, hold on a second. The Crown is going to govern the day-to-day affairs when we've been doing this ourselves for 100 years? Hold on now. What was the reaction by the colonies? Well, bloodshed, eventually. On the docks, in shipping, tax collectors were harassed by colonies, by the colonists, especially with the Sons of Liberty, Sam Adams group. And these events led the Crown, led the King, led Parliament to, in 1768, they broke up the legislature in Massachusetts, and they stationed British troops in Boston, and they patrolled the city, they governed the city. So, let me put bloodshed here. 1770. So 1768, we have British control of Boston. 1770, the Boston Massacre. Boston Massacre. Now there were 5 people who were killed. It's a big word, massacre, for 5 people. At the time, not discounting their deaths in any way. But only 5 people were killed. It was British troops firing into a mob, into a crowd of unarmed civilians in Boston. And what happened after that? Well, colonists weren't happy, of course. So England tried to de-escalate the tension. They tried to bring things down a little bit. They clamped down earlier. Now, wait a minute. It's getting a little out of hand here. Our troops are killing people, colonists, over there in Boston. This is a problem. So they repeal the Townshend Act, but they pass the Tea Act. But the Tea Act, and we're talking 1773. So notice how these things take a little while, okay, to happen. Stamp Act, Sugar Act, we're 64, 65. Now we're all the way to 1773. Okay, 9 years later, passed the Tea Act. What happened after that? This was 1773. A lot of tea was being smuggled into the colonies. And the Tea Act allowed the East India Trading Company to sell tea directly to colonists at low prices. Now, I guess colonists drank a lot of tea. Otherwise, why would this be a big deal? So they must have drank a lot of tea. I don't know why this would be a problem. I'm kind of smiling at that as I think about it. But it was. Right? So they repealed the Townsend Act. They passed the Tea Act. It let the company sell tea directly to the colonists at low prices. It was hoped that the low prices would reduce smuggling and encourage buying, and therefore they would make more money. The crown would make more money on the tax, more tax money, but merchants, colonial merchants and smugglers, were worried they'd be put out of business. So they weren't happy about this. Well, the Boston Tea Party was next. That's December 1773, where the Sons of Liberty demanded that some ships, 3 ships from the East India Trading Company, they docked in Boston Harbor. Sons of Liberty said, "You got to go." Demanded that they leave. The governor, the royal governor, remember, it's not independent anymore politically. Not Boston anyway. It's run by the British. Said, no, you got to pay the tax on the tea. Ship commander didn't know what to do, so the boat stayed put. Sons of Liberty dressed up as Native Americans, boarded the ship, threw all the tea into Boston Harbor, all 340 chests. That's a lot of tea to the harbor. And what did the Crown do? Well, the Crown wasn't going to have it. So they passed in 1774 what the colonists call the Intolerable Acts. 1774, right? December 1773, end of the year. Boston Tea Party, 1774, the next year. Soon afterwards, the Intolerable Acts. What happened? Boston Harbor was closed until Boston paid for all the ruined tea. The Crown took over the government of Massachusetts, and a British general, his name was Thomas Gage, he became the governor of Massachusetts. A new quartering act required colonists to house British soldiers. So colonists had to clear out rooms for British soldiers to come stay in their house. Just as an aside, it's not going to be on your test probably, but it's interesting, I think. One of the Bill of Rights says that, I'd have to go look up which one, top of my head, I don't remember. I didn't look it up. It says that people in the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution, says that people don't have to don't have to house soldiers on our property. We don't have to house U.S. soldiers. All right? Where did that come from? Well, it came from the British making the colonists open up their homes to British soldiers. I just think that's interesting. What else? Royal officials who were accused of crimes. They were tried in England and not in the colonies. And in England, they faced friendly judges and juries. And the colonists called all these things the Intolerable Acts, 1774. Now, Britain hoped that they would clamp down, they would bring back some order in the colonies, Boston, Massachusetts anyway. And it had the opposite effect. It led to war. So you can see, just a quick review, political context, economic context. They had this system. They were largely independent politically, but then that changed with the Declaratory Act, then the Intolerable Acts, 1766, 1774. Over time, that changed when the Crown started to impose laws on the colonists, and they've been governing themselves for 100 years. So hold on a second. Stay out of our business. They started to impose all these taxes that they weren't happy about. Why? In large part because of the French and Indian War. They had to pay for that. They had to get the money from somewhere. Why did they get it from the colonists? Mercantilism. That's the whole system that was set up by England on the colonies. That's why they had colonies. They had colonies so they could make money. They didn't have colonies so they could support the colonies. They wanted the colonies to support the home country, to support England. If I'm England, colonies, you're going to support me if I'm England. And then all this leads to them trying to get some money. Action, reaction, action, reaction. Tension builds until 1774, Intolerable Acts. And then we're going to see coming up next, fighting starts in 1775. Independence is declared in 1776. So those are the causes of the American Revolution.